Smash!
Accept the Black Lord's blessings.
Heya! Today we're going to be undertaking my proudest kit bash yet, as I will be converting my old Lord of Contagion into the Lord of the Flies. This figure has practically become a collector's item, and it's a shame that it never got its own proper release. But since my old one admittedly had a really dated paint job, I decided to clean him up and build him into the true embodiment of the grandfather's blessings. But before we get into the kit bashing, I humbly ask you like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that little bell, really helps the channel, and if you really like what you see, consider becoming a channel member. You get some extra goodies, get some extra content, and you get to see my videos early. And it really helps me create better content for the channel, as well as more content overall. Huge thank you to my channel members. But enough talk, let's get into the actual kit bashing. So to start him out, I had to let him sit in AK Interactive's paint stripper for a good while. His old base is fitted with a rather thick piece of cork, and I decided to keep it that way. He's an imposing model, and the extra height would really make him stand out in a proper army. Though I don't exactly have any plans to make a proper army, I'm not much of a gamer. I'd also diligently clean off the old mold lines I had neglected to remove when I initially painted him years back, and the stray remnants of paint would also be scraped. Ultimately, I'm not entirely worried about this, as it really won't affect the overall paint job. I mostly just want to get rid of the clumps that are blocking any finer details. Also, I make this argument plenty of times in the video, but he's a Nurgly miniature. Little bits and pieces of stray remnant paint actually add on to the texture in my opinion, but if you're a perfectionist, I don't blame you for removing it. Once he was stationary on the base, I began placing the most important piece of the kit bash in place. And it didn't fit at all. But this was expected. I'd planned on shaving this down to begin with, but the paint strip bath actually made it so the old glue was removed from the miniature. This allowed me to take apart the back piece from the main torso. This gave me the opportunity to dryly fit in the head, and of course it still didn't fit. This is a huge melon. I'd still be forced to snip down the fly face on the back as well as the underside, and it looks very rough with how I'm doing it, but I assure you this was calculated. The last thing I'd want to do is snip down any details on the eyes or the overall helmet. Once I did this, I was able to comfortably and very snugly place in the melon inside of the armor. I love how this looks already. This is actually technically a recreation of one of my older miniatures that I painted back in the day, so I already like how this looks. I then begin sealing up any displacements or gaps in the armor using some Tamiya. Even though I shaved down the melon, there still wasn't enough room for the back piece and the front piece to fully adhere together. But not the end of the world, we can seal this up easy peasy. I'd also begin shaving away at the cork on the base, as I wanted it to look a little bit more conjoined with the base rather than just this random slab. I'd also glue on some friends to the base as well, this being a swarm of flies from the Gellerpox infected kit, as well as a Nurgling from Mortarian's kit. I really do love how many spare Nurglings you get with the Death Guard line. As the two minis began adhering to the base, I'd actually super glue on more to the areas of the cork that had been shaved away as well as any bald spots on the base itself. I'd give a good showering of beach sand to the base, creating a very rough and jagged gravel texture. I really love using this stuff. Its sporadic texture really gives the impression of a ruined city. So despite my initial run of Tamiya, I'd go back in and use some more sprue goo to seal in any cracks on the model. All the little ugly gaps would be sealed up, and I'd actually add a little bit more to the base around the ribcage of the fly swarm. And I'd sprinkle some more sand in place. Reason I did this instead of PVA was just a little experiment to see if I could use it as a glue replacement. It kinda worked. I'd actually repeat this process later on, but I wouldn't add any gravelly texture afterwards. I'll elaborate a little bit more when it comes up. After a little while of working with the Mini, I decided that the balance looked a little bit off having this Nurgling with the Chaos Star right next to this huge meat grinder axe. So I snipped it. This piece is pretty neato, so I'm sure I'll use it for another kit bash down the line. To replace it, I used this skewered marine helm from the Chaos Terminators kit. This looks much better composition-wise, but it also allows me to paint more contrasting colors via the helmet itself. But after this, it's time for the more integral pieces of the kit bash. Beyond the fly head, of course. As we need some wings, and for this, I'm using Plague Drone wings. This sprue is actually something I got off of eBay for a good fraction of the original kit's price, which I actually encourage you to do if you want to do more kit bashes. No sense in buying a whole kit if you're only going to use a couple parts. To adhere the wings, I actually had to snip off portions of the original miniature, which admittedly kinda hurt, but I actually don't care for these spikes, so the pain quickly subsided. I trimmed down the wings at an angle, and I'd adhere them using a little bit of sprue goo. One thing that I had to keep in mind is that these pieces wouldn't magically stay in place just because I glued them on. I'd end up having to brace the miniature a good 15 minutes per wing in order to form a proper bond. Also, a little bit of sprue goo soon quickly turned into a lot of sprue goo. My original plan was to make it look as if these wings burst from the pauldrons, but adding more sprue goo made it look as if they were morphed into the pauldrons, which I actually liked a little bit better. Adding in a little bit more pure Tamiya as well really allows it to really conform to the miniature itself, so it ends up being more structurally sound and it looks cool. Once they were on, this looks really good. I'm really happy. It's disgustingly nurgly, but you know I couldn't just leave it at that. We then shaved down the shoulders of the cape, which this actually did hurt a little bit more. I really love this cape. But it's for a good reason. Adding on the bigger wings truly makes them look like a monstrous insectoid. Now the key to making the adhesion process look so gnarly was actually gluing on the wings in place with super glue, and then adhering our sprue goo. It creates this nasty, crusty texture, which I personally find perfect for the figure. If you don't like the texture, I'm sure you could do this in a far cleaner method, but come on, it's an Ergo Mini. Gotta make them go full gross. Patience was key during this process. As much as I wanted to work on the Mini, fiddling with it wouldn't do me any favors. I think the position of the wings looks a little goofy in terms of whether or not this Mini could actually take flight, but who cares? Like always, it's really cool. He's a demon too. Our silly little laws of physics do not apply to him. Well, sort of. I still had to balance him so his bigger wings wouldn't fall over, but who cares? It's a Mini. It's my world, it's my guy, you shut up. I found that the drone sprue also had some interesting bits within it after the wings were in place, especially this gross little melon. I cut it from its original weird bone thing that it was attached to, and I'd mounted on the axe. Maybe I'm too picky, but I felt like the axe actually looked a little bald without this in place. I feel like with all the bombastic bits added onto the miniature, just a little spike would make it look a little bit more symmetrical. I'd also feather in more sprue goo onto the back, and I'd take a little time cleaning up some of the mold lines I didn't clean up earlier. And with that, I am very, very happy with how this guy is looking. But once I showed it off to my friend, they noted that with all these mutations, he practically looked like a demon prince. So with that, we decided to add on a little bit more real estate to his base. The original Lord of Contagion uses a 50mm base for some reason, and apparently this is weird at the time. I don't know anything about the rules, I'll be honest. But a proper Demon Prince uses a 60mm base. I just end up gluing this onto the 60mm, as I don't really want to magnetize it because I don't really have any plans to run this guy. I just want more space to add on cool nurgly bits to the base. And to add on said cool nurgly stuff, I'd begin by adding on a moat of sorts using Pro-Acryl's gravel texture. This would give me a nice blend of sorts, making the figure look crested upon a destroyed wasteland. While it dried, I sprinkled on more beach sand as I wanted to keep the texture uniform. I'd also begin wedging in spikes from the Chaos Terminator's kit as well as the Chaos Rhino sprue. I'd also glue in some old skulls onto the base, and I'd be sure to push them deep within the texture. The spikes worked well to add onto this wasteland setting. I just kinda had to be careful picking up the Mini. Watch out for those pointy bits. I'd also bisect this Poxwalker and very messily superglue his torso to the base. With him looking as if he's sinking into the base, I think you know where I'm going with this. I'd also add in another Poxwalker melon into the mix, and I'd actually recycle the spike from the Lord of Contagion back onto the base. After doing so, I'd begin adding in an absolute flood of sprue goo to create a liquidy texture over the entirety of the base. I also angled some of the ooze to flow from the top part of the base down to the lower portions, creating these little streams of nastiness. Initially, my idea was to just add in these smaller pools of the pus, but I felt like doing an actual moat around the miniature would look even more visually striking. In hindsight, I could argue that I should have put on a little bit more than I did, as the pools themselves during the painting process ended up being bigger. I'd also add in just slight touches of superglue as I wanted to make more of that crusty look onto the base, more so on the top side. I'd also lazily string it onto the Poxwalker, and this ended up looking kinda cool. It's not great by any means, I'd probably use a different form of glue if I wanted to create a stringier effect, but I like how this looks. I'd also add in this Plaguebearer arm from the drone kit as well, and I'd have him reaching in from the depths of the rotted pool. Things are now really coming together. The Plague Bearer hand also has this weird nurgly tube of sorts. I'm not really sure what it is. Initially, I planned on snipping it, but it looks really gross, so I kept it attached. Also, thing to note is that these little pools will eventually dry and sag down, so using more was actually something that I was willing to do, as it would just end up looking like the gravelly texture below if I didn't. And as a last little step, I took the time to shave down and sand the rim of the base to remove any little remnants of the goo that may have spilled off. I'd also take the time to remove any excess sand or lint from the base, and as you can see, I had already primed the main mini by this point. So once I was happy with the base, I'd prime it the same color. And I ultimately decided it's time for the painting. The painting process was quite long, as this is the biggest mini I've ever painted for the channel, but I think it was worth it. Also, as just a little incentive for channel members, the tutorial will actually be uploaded exclusively for you guys. If you're not a channel member, don't worry too much, as this won't be the last time I paint any nurgly miniatures on the channel. I love Death Guard way too much. I really do love painting them, and they're by far one of the best factions for relaxed painting and new painters. They truly are an army in which you can really sit back, relax, do the fun weathering bits, and not worry too much about the tedious methods. Fun fact, one of my first armies I ever painted was Death Guard. I really do have a soft spot for these guys. But once I was done, I was left with one of my favorite minis I've ever painted. I love this guy. From the moment I found my original miniature with the fly face, I knew that I had to make this figure. I'm almost half tempted to strip my other Death Guard minis from the Dark Imperium set. They're kind of amazing and I'd love to paint them on the channel. But if I'm honest, it all relies on how much you guys like this video. Like always, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Maybe share it with a friend that likes painting Death Guard. Every little bit helps. Seriously, please give me more incentive. I love painting Death Guard. Okay, getting a little ahead of myself. And I've certainly flapped my beak too much for one video. So until next time, remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.